look at what is taking place in November, especially on the United States Senate side, Republicans right now, they have a 53-47 majority. But the issue that we're looking at right now is that you've got some serious headwinds. Ossoff, Republicans have not been able to find a top tier candidate to run against incumbent Senator John Ossoff in Georgia. Roy Cooper, listen, the polling shows him up 25 or so points, hugely popular in that state. That could be a pickup for Democrats. Then you've got the main race. Susan Collins, incumbent, facing some serious troubles. It all depends upon will Maine Governor Janet Mills be the nominee, or will Grant Plantner, who is this upstart individual grassroots guy, will he be it? You look at Iowa. Farmers really pissed off with Donald Trump's incumbent Senator Joni Ernst not running for re-election. Then you've got the case in Michigan where you have incumbent not running, but the question is, will Democrats hold that? Then you got the Alaska seat where that it could be a potential Democrat pickup there. So when we look at this map, Candace, we're looking at the possibility. Everybody talks about the House and how Republicans believe they're going to lose the House, but there's a very good chance that Democrats could win the Senate, and that would be a huge, huge deal if they're able to pull that off.
Oh, it would be a huge deal. As we know, that's a huge deal in terms of making the laws that affect everybody across the country. I look at the elections like this. It's like the storm. So I'm in New Jersey, and we heard so many things about this storm, but you really have to pay attention to what the weathercasters are saying, the forecasters are saying, just a couple of days before the storm. That's really when you know whether or not 24 inches is coming. And it's the same way with elections. We are getting a lot of information now. We've got some elections coming up on Tuesday, and then certainly there's November. But what's going to be important is that messaging right before. We were talking about Jesse Jackson, and before he said, "I am somebody," he said, "I am poor. I may be poor, but I am somebody." And I think that that's a lot of the messaging that we have been hearing from people, including, your interview with the candidate in North Carolina. And that is that people are suffering, and that the middle class, they're being squeezed out, whether it's school loans or health insurance or the cost of housing. This is something that if we are able to keep on brand in terms of the messaging, then people will listen. But we have to knock it in people's heads that the people who you are about to vote for, you are going to see change. Now, sometimes that's a difficult process because people have voted for politicians before that they believed in, and nothing changed. This is a different time. We have never had this storm that we have had before, in terms of all of these, the perfect storm as they call it, in terms of all these factors, the Donald Trump, the healthcare, the student loans, the cost of groceries that are going up. The messaging is really important. I think that people are really paying attention this time, and that's going to make a huge difference and really perhaps be the outcome that you talked about.
Also, what is needed, Michael, is energy, energy, energy. Listen, Republicans are in power. Democrats pissed off. When we talk about the No Kings rally, I remember people like, oh, these people they're just wasting their time. But I keep trying to explain to people, protests are designed to people to show their dissatisfaction. But then is what you do after that. How do you build upon that? How do you connect with people? How do you talk to people? The economy is still a major issue. Affordability, housing, food prices. Donald Trump is in Texas, in Corpus Christi today, lying his ass off, talking about how gas is below $2.30. That's a lie. And lying about everything else. You got RFK Jr. telling people, oh, ignore food prices, or ignore beef prices going up. Y'all should just eat more liver. Literally, he said that. And those things are happening. And so really on the Democratic side, if you're able to get candidates that can really fire the base up, now all of a sudden, and they're willing to go after, to really be aggressive in targeting their Republican opponent. I mean, again, Democrats stand a chance. Republicans are playing on the defense because they have to defend these policies. They have to defend Donald Trump claiming this is going to be the golden era and things are going to be amazing. And people kind of like, I'm sorry, I don't see it and I'm not feeling it.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, Roland. And you have to have candidates that can electrify the base, not so much based upon personality, but based upon the issues and connecting the issues to people's pain and showing how your vote is a vote to fight for policies that are beneficial to you. Okay. So, Jasmine Crockett is a perfect example of that. Yes, she's brilliant, but it's more than just having a candidate that can electrify people. It's having a candidate that will motivate people to stand in line for an hour, for 2 hours to vote for them. Okay. And in some cases, depending upon the district, you may have to stand in line for a while. Okay. Somebody like Jasmine Crockett, people feel she's fighting for them. Okay. And one of the things where she's really good at is using her 5 minutes in House of Representative hearings.
Michael, here's the deal. Michael, here's the deal. I'm not putting the Texas race in this. I'm not. I'm just straight up. I mean, when I look at the map, and the Democrat, when I look at the map and the Democrats' pathway to regain the Senate,
right,
the Texas race is not in the mix. All these people who keep saying it's in play, I'm not saying in play. When I look at the map, again, you hold Georgia, you have to hold Michigan.
I agree.
I see the Democratic pickups. I see the Democratic pickups really in 4 places. I see North Carolina very strong. I see Maine very strong. I see Iowa, Alaska, and the last one, Ohio, where you've got John Husted, who's running against longtime Senator Sherrod Brown. And so those, to me, those are the 5 places where the Democrats could actually win. You win 4 of those, you're 51-49. And if I had to say, frankly, out of those 5, I see North Carolina as 1. I see Maine as 2. Alaska, I see Alaska as 3. Ohio is 4. Iowa 5. I don't put Texas, Florida, Mississippi in that mix.
Right.
I see those as the 5, not Texas.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Okay. And the U.S. Senate is extremely important when it comes to blocking Trump's nominations for federal judges, for any cabinet positions if somebody leaves, things like this. I totally agree with that. And on top of that, in my agreement with you, but also qualities to look for in these candidates for the U.S. Senate, okay, or House of Representatives, but especially the Senate, okay, because it's more than just having somebody in that position. It's also understanding how they educate people, okay, how they educate their constituents as well. So I totally agree with that. But the Senate is extremely important when it comes to federal judges, which are lifetime appointments, U.S. Supreme Court nominations. It's expected that Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito will probably retire in the next 2 years, because they're the oldest Supreme Court justices. Well, what that means is Donald Trump will get 2 more nominations. If Democrats are in control of the Senate, they can block those nominations. They can block those confirmations to the Supreme Court. So I definitely agree with that.
That's why I'm saying
go ahead.
But that's what I'm saying hold on, Michael. That's what I'm saying from a party standpoint. Again, this is where you have to make critical decisions. This is why I keep telling people, Matt, stop saying Texas is in play. Listen, I'm from Texas, okay? I'm just being honest about what I see. Sure, all of a sudden, listen, lightning could very well strike, but I have to also look at the data. I have to examine the data. And again, Beto O'Rourke came the closest in the last 30 years, and he lost by 2.5 points. He raised $100 million. He visited 254 counties. And so when I look at these progressives, these white progressives, who are like, oh my God, she's costing us a check. No, the idea that you have this really like that Texas is a great pickup, it's not. I don't see Texas or Florida or Mississippi as a great pickup opportunity for Democrats. Do I believe you have to run? Yes. Do you believe you run hard? Yes. But if I'm looking at this map, Matt, I have to be realistic to say, where can you actually win? And it's really 5 other places that are the dominant places that they have a great shot to recapture the Senate. And Texas and Florida, Mississippi is not one of those states.
I get that perspective. And, I'm not a political theorist or political strategist, so maybe I'm not qualified to really opine on this. But I think, maybe this is the election where the data is obviously still very important, but maybe that perspective of yours needs to change a little bit because, this kind of harkens back to a conversation we had about Mamdani months ago and whether what happens in New York City reverberates around the rest of the country. I think we're at an inflection point politically where, it might be more realistic than it has ever been before for Texas to turn back blue. Maybe not. I don't know. But I'm not sure that the data really shows that because, we see the polling data, we see what people are saying, but we also see anecdotally that people are seeming to be far more energized this election. So maybe this is the election where that that tide turns. What I do think is interesting about this election is I don't think they'll use it in their primary necessarily, but in Maine, they have ranked choice voting. And right now you've got that Plattner race against Governor Mills. And it sounds like, from my understanding, he's polling a lot stronger than she is. And I think that could be a harbinger for a sea change in who's actually getting elected, meaning the Roy Coopers and the Janet Mills and the people who have been in office forever, whether people are wholesale eschewing them and bringing in new blood. I think that this is going to be a good barometer for that and how that might look for the subsequent general election in 2028 or, the next elections in 2028. I'm interested in kind of how that shakes out. But, maybe this is the election where Texas turns the tide. People are far more energized here than I remember them even being for Beto O'Rourke. But you're right about the numbers, and I don't know how that comes out.
Okay, so what I do is first and foremost, Candace, I don't get excited about primary turnouts. So let me explain. First of all, a primary is a primary, and typically your voters are going to vote. So I don't get excited by that. What I look at is I look at a campaign. And I look at, most importantly, organization and mobilization. What I saw with Mamdani, and this is why I thought that race was different. I saw a candidate who studied the map and said, how can I achieve victory in the primary? And so, I remember people were saying, Mamdani is not focused on black voters. And I literally said, why? They were like, what do you mean? Black voters are critical in New York City. I said, yes. But how many black candidates are running? There were like 5 black candidates. I said, so if I was Mamdani and I need to win the primary, I'm studying the map. And I'm saying, I'm gonna focus my time on this portion of the electorate to get me to victory. Because if I expend time and energy, it's already 5 black candidates who also target that same group. That was a smart strategy. What I saw was candidate raising money, messaging, but he was organizing and mobilizing. When you looked at his young numbers, when you looked at 1829, 1835. So the reason I don't put Texas in that category is because I'm not doing that based upon the primary. What I'm doing it is based upon, okay, I'm going to look at Texas not in February and go, oh my goodness, Texas could change. No, I'm going to look at Texas in August. I want to see the organization. 60% of Texas, minority. 60% of those that vote in Texas are white. And so when I'm looking at states, I'm looking at pathways to victory. And so when I look at Georgia, hold. North Carolina, hugely popular former governor. He's going to crush the Republicans. That's a Democratic pickup. I think Susan Collins is prime to be upset in Maine. I think that's a Democratic pickup. Okay? Now, all of a sudden, Democrats if you hold Georgia, you hold Michigan, you're now at 49. Okay, what's now my 50 and 51? Now, you got Mayor Patola in Alaska. All right, got strong candidate. She could win there. Now the issue comes down to two states, Midwestern states, Iowa and Ohio. So the question is, can the Democratic nominee in Iowa really showcase how Trump has been screwing farmers, running them to bankruptcy, and can they still be so mad? Listen, Joni Ernst chose not to run for a reason. And then you look at Ohio, okay, has gone red. You got those union workers. Sherrod Brown has a history of being had strong union backing, but he also lost to a Republican, and so now he's trying to fill the term of J.D. Vance. So the question is, can he speak to the economy and blame it on Republicans enough to pick it up? That's how we're looking at it. And what people have to understand is this is where you put your time, energy, and money. If somebody said to me, hey, Roland, will you broadcast shows in Kentucky? Well, if I had to look at finite time, I'm going to say I'm probably going to broadcast in Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, and Ohio, and I'm not going to be in Kentucky because you have to factor in just finite time, finite money, finite resources. To me, that is the Democrats' pathway to winning the Senate.
It is. And this is why civics is so important. So you can understand exactly what are the races that you need to be paying attention to. And more than that, what is the language that they're speaking so that they bring in people like the suffering farmers? They bring in people like, suffering everybody who has been complaining, rightfully so, about things that have been changing in terms of skyrocketing prices. I think the reason that so many people have their eyes on Texas, and again, I understand what you're saying, is because there is a template that is being created that people have not seen before in this Black woman, number one. And then there's an understanding and a dialogue that these people in the primaries are having. And so that alerts other people who are worrying about November and are worrying about states that are going to be more, they're going to be more wins, like a Maine. And they're saying to themselves, this is what I should be hearing from my candidate. And it changes your perspective about what your relationship with potential candidate or the person that you are going to be voting for is. I think that that's the one thing, and that's why people don't necessarily have their eyes on the bigger picture. They're liking what they're seeing at this level, and they're hoping for it and looking for a different exchange and dialogue in the candidates that they're going to be making the difference in the Senate to make it perhaps 49-51 in terms of Republicans versus Democrats. And I think that is worthwhile looking at and understanding what is the expectation of somebody who is running for office in 2026 in this perfect storm.
But here's the deal. I don't give a shit what they're saying. I'm being very serious. Winning is about numbers. When I look at Texas, it's 254 counties. The reason Democrats lose is because they focus on Harris, Dallas, Bayer, Travis. Tarrant County is the last large red county. And they get crushed everywhere else in Texas, 65-35, 70-30, 80-20 by Republicans. You have to organize the state. Fundamentally, Georgia is a state that is where it is in play because they organize the state. And this is what I'm talking about. This is why when I talk about why I support black voters matter, it's because you have to literally build that infrastructure. Again, I'm going to go back to Beto O'Rourke. He built an amazing campaign team. He built an amazing infrastructure. They raised $100 million, and he lost. And so where we are now is when we talk about, and the people who are watching, and I'm saying this for a reason because I need people to understand the conversation with Roy Cooper, why I kept saying, why must we as black people organize East North Carolina, the Black Belt, because that's where Black votes are. And now all of a sudden, if we work to organize East North Carolina for Cooper in 2028, then Anita Earls, the Black woman, I'm sorry, Cooper for 2026, Anita Earls, the Black woman, the lone African American on the North Carolina State Supreme Court, then we champion her, she gets reelected. Now it's 5 Republicans, 2 Democrats on North Carolina Supreme Court. Guess what? Now you have created your template for 2028. Why is 2028 going to be important? One, Josh Stein will be back on the ballot as a Democrat running for re-election. The Lieutenant Governor, Democrat, on the ballot running for re-election. The Attorney General and Secretary of State, those 4 Democrats. But most important, there are going to be 3 Republican Supreme Court seats on the ballot in 2028. But you've built the infrastructure. So the concern that I have with Texas and Florida is that there has not been sufficient infrastructure built to win those states. Nikki Fried is trying to do her part in Florida to rebuild that party. Why I have no faith in my native state? I don't even know who the Texas party chair is in Texas. Matt, do you know the person's name?
Yeah, I don't. I was just thinking that. I'm not sure.
Got no idea. Got no idea. I don't know. I can't do the name. I don't know where they based. I ain't never had a conversation with them to even understand what the hell is they're trying to do. We just had the North Carolina State Supreme. I mean, that's what's crazy to me. On this show, we've had the Virginia Democratic State Party chair. We've had the North Carolina State Party chair. We've had the Florida State Party chair. I don't even know who the Texas State Party chair is. So I just don't see Texas as being an organized state. And I'm walking through this for the purpose of our viewers and listeners, because what I keep harping on is we have to stop having a macro conversation. That is, oh my God, hey, Texas is in play. No, having a micro conversation. Okay, how is East Texas being organized? How are folks organizing Latino voters in South Texas? You're dealing with West Texas as well. And the whole point is not, oh, you're going to win those counties. The issue for a Democrat is not losing 65-35, 70-30, 80-20. The issue is, can you lose 55-45? You lose 55-45, 58-42. Now you can make up the difference in your large counties. You can't keep losing. Again, there are 254 counties in Texas. You focus on 4 large counties, 10 counties, big rate. Shit, those 5, it's still 249 counties left. And so so to me, that's the whole deal. So as we are talking about for Black people, how do we organize? It has to be a micro strategy. What is this precinct and this one and this one and this one and this one and this one? So all of a sudden, if we're talking about the top 25 precincts in the city, all of a sudden it's like, oh, damn, that's the determinant who wins the election. And so that's where I think where we have to be. So a lot of times when we have these political conversations, people are trying to be pie in the sky, big, broad. And I'm saying, if you have not created the infrastructure on the ground, not TV ads, not radio ads, but the get out the vote infrastructure on the ground, if that is non-existent, there is no candidate who is so charismatic that they can overcome that. Charisma of a candidate will never be able to overcome a lack of infrastructure. And that applies to Jasmine Crockett, James Tallarico, or any other person running. You gotta have an infrastructure to win.
Yeah, but can I push back on that a little bit, at least with respect to Texas?
Go ahead.
But I think part of the problem is, I mean, what you've identified is several of those counties are by far the major population centers, right? Bexar County or San Antonio, Travis, my hometown, Austin, Harris, where you're from, Houston, even Nueces, where I am, Dallas, Fort Worth, Lubbock. And then the rest of the state, for the most part, is not nearly as concentrated. So in talking about organization, I don't think you're wrong with the general premise, but I do think we're not talking about Parker County and we're not talking about Tom Green County. And we're not talking about these far-flung places where there's only 30,000 people. I think you absolutely have to focus on those people. But I think to organize in a state like Texas, you've got to your earlier point, use your finite resources where it makes sense. I think the thing that the Democratic Party needs to do, not only organize more so, but is to organize and pick up more votes in places like Lubbock. For instance, the Lubbock City Council just voted the other day about, I think the City Council, about not having a dedicated prayer time during school, right? And people are up in arms about it, right? There's this whole rift about whether Lubbock's leaders are really God-fearing and God focused and all that stuff. But my point is, Lubbock is a place that Democrats just completely write off. But Lubbock is changing. Lubbock is a lot more progressive than it was even 12 years ago, 13 years ago when I was in law school. I think you pick up enough votes in little places like that, you buttress it with the votes in Harris County and Travis County, and then the organization pays off for itself. I don't see how you really make inroads in Orange County where Beaumont is, or those kinds of places. I mean, it just, the way Texas is set up, it doesn't make sense to spend your time and your resources.
Wait, hold up. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? When you talk about Beaumont, no. When you talk about Beaumont, you literally, Beaumont and Port Arthur, it's a lot of black people there. See, here's my whole point. The issue.
I'm saying comparatively.
What? No. But the problem, but again, it's not a question of a lot of people, Matt. This is what I'm talking about. It's a question of, if you lose in rural parts of the state, what's the margin in which you lose? What I am saying, this applies to Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan. Michigan, outside of Detroit, Lansing, and Flint, Michigan is a red state. You showed a map of Michigan, it's a lot of red. Minnesota is called a blue state. It's a lot of red. Trump only lost Minnesota by 4 points the last election. Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and the suburbs, they call Pennsylvania Alabama outside of those places. And so one of the reasons Democrats lose in Texas, I'm right here. It says, I'm looking at how Texas counties voted for Beto O'Rourke in the primary, and then 4 or 5 months later, Cruz votes swept across rural Texas despite losing cities. And that's my whole point. So my point is, what happens is, when you look at the map, and I don't have it here, so I'm just going to go to the camera. This right here.
Mm-hmm.
That's how Ted Cruz, right there. That's blue and that's red. Now, the issue with all of those red counties, is not you lost the counties. The issue is, how much did you lose the county? And historically, Democrats have been getting crushed in these counties by massive margins because they did not have the organization. They've been losing Florida in the last 4 cycles because they stopped investing in Florida. They've been getting crushed. Before, what Stacey Abrams and Warnock did in Georgia, they were getting crushed in Georgia. They never competed in rural places. And so this is what I'm saying. That requires organization, but year-round organization and mobilization. And what I'm saying, for black people, where we have numbers, we've got to be thinking that way, because then it changed electoral politics. And this is the thing, and this even goes back to, like I saw, and this is why James Carville should shut the hell up. James Carville at some video, and he was trashing Ilhan Omar. She needs to leave the party, all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, James Carville, you're a complete dumbass. There are 435 House races in the United States. And you know what? People vote in those congressional districts based on who they like. Listen, Rashida Tlaib is representing there in Detroit. How many black people have she beaten in Detroit in that race in the last 4 elections? She been wiping out everybody black in Detroit. Steve Cohen in Memphis. All the top black folks that run against him, he wiped them out. Now the question is he going to be able to beat Representative Justin Pearson in the primary this year? We'll see. And so what my deal to Carville is, stop saying stupid stuff like run Ilhan Omar out of the party, her district votes for her. Tlaib's district votes for her. AOC's district votes for her. But how a person runs in a congressional race is totally different than how you have to run in a statewide race. And so it requires infrastructure. I'm tired of black people saying, hey, man, we got to get our people to vote. How you going to do it? Where are the votes? How are you talking to them? How are you reaching them? Well, what? It ain't going to happen through osmosis. And that's why I'm saying when I look at this here, why the infrastructure has to be built and sustained, and it can't be, well, Beto ran, he lost in 2018. We are 8 years later. So let's look at the map. Beto lost in 2018 in Texas by 223,000 votes, 2.6 points. Allred runs 6 years later. He loses by 10 points. I'm sorry. If the infrastructure was in place, you don't go from a 2.6 point lead loss to a 10-point loss. And now all of a sudden, the state's going to flip. That's why I can't buy that. You got to have the infrastructure that stays in place, and you're building upon that. So the next cycle. Remember, they started in 2012 election in Georgia. They didn't flip Georgia until 2020. It took them 8 years of ground game. And that's what has to happen. And so final comments, Michael, Candace, and Matt on that whole idea.
Yeah, that's the infrastructure investment that we've talked about. We had this conversation, Roland, a few months ago when I gave the example of Florida and how some election cycles ago, I saw a news story where Florida, the Republicans in Florida talked about how they embedded in the community, their campaign offices were reaching out to Latinos, helping them with immigration forms, having movie nights, things like that. They became part of the community, okay? So then when you come to them to vote for you, you're not a foreigner. You've already established that type of relationship. So yeah, the investment has to come. And I think African Americans, we have to really focus on organizing these states, outside of a Democratic Party, not relying on the party to do that. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I mean I was just sitting here thinking. Candace, Nevada.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know why Democrats were winning in Nevada? Harry Reid had strong infrastructure. What happened the last two elections? Democrats were like, damn, it's going to be tough because Harry Reid died. So that's a perfect example I'm talking about. The infrastructure cannot be tied to a person. This was black people love us some Obama. Progressives and Democrats love Obama. But my biggest criticism of Obama is that Obama had an infrastructure that was about him. It wasn't about the party. And so he didn't give a flip about the party. Obama for America became Organizing for America, and they were essentially competing with the DNC. And so, 1,000 seats lost, but they had no infrastructure. The black community, again, after Reverend Jackson lost in 88, they put in place a strong black infrastructure in the DNC. When Obama ran in 2008, he didn't need that infrastructure. Okay, that worked fine for him, but what about all the candidates below him? Governor, U.S. Senator, U.S. House, State Rep, State House, County Commissioner, City Council, Sheriff, DA, judicial races. That is the whole point of an infrastructure. So to Michael's point, what I'm arguing for black people, our black infrastructure, we may vote Democrat, but our black infrastructure must be a black infrastructure that's not completely controlled by the party, because we have to have the flexibility to be able to, where it is going on 365 and we are looking at our politics in a broad way. That is the mistake. When I look at our community, we're waiting for the candidate to decide how much money he or she's now going to invest in the Black community to turn out to vote. When I'm like, yo, we can't wait on them to actually do that. We've got to be funding our own infrastructure to then say, okay, we already got our infrastructure here. Now, what can you supplement? Because when the election is over, we still got to keep the infrastructure going. If we let it die after the election, now we're trying to restart it 2 years later, and then restart it 2 years later, and then restart it 2 years later, and you lose.
Right, right. You lose the continuity. And I think one of the other takeaways is that in terms of having an infrastructure that works, you have to have consistent people. And that means there's going to be a turnaround of people, and more people have to either be in line or be involved in order to keep that infrastructure going. So one of the takeaways that I'm getting from what we've been talking about and that people should be reminded of is that you should start making sure that people understand the civil process and what it takes to run for office, and get them ready and prime them to run for office. Get them ready to learn how to build infrastructures, because those are the people who we need. I think the other thing, though, that we should also consider is that you might have an infrastructure for Black people, as long as you keep the messaging on point that keep the Black people's attention. Because let's remember, there are 20% of Black men that left, and some Black women too, who did not vote the way that they thought they would. You have to keep all of that up. So the infrastructure, I'm saying, just has to change and keep up with the times, because the times certainly have been changing.
Absolutely. Matt, final comment.
So my comment is, I don't think you're wrong, but I think we're focusing on different parts of the same idea. I don't disagree with the idea that infrastructure and continuity are important, but I think what you're eschewing and that I'm focusing on is the fact that the candidate, I think, is a big part of that, the biggest part of that right now. And I think we're at a different inflection point in society than we were when Beto O'Rourke ran. Beto O'Rourke didn't run where the president was basically doing something unconstitutional every single day, and everyone's talking about what he's doing at every single moment of every single day. And there's this huge rift in society the way that there is now. I mean, of course, there's. I don't know that it was like it is now. How is it like it is now?
Trump was president. Trump was in the White House.
But it wasn't like it is now.
2018.
It wasn't like
and
it
Beto
is now.
ran against Beto ran against a dude Republicans hate.
He ran against Ted Cruz. I remember this. I remember the race. But what I'm saying is, I think things are different now. I think the environment is different now. I think people's expectations are different now. And I think, yes, Texas Democrats are trying to replicate Beto O'Rourke and actually get over the finish line. But I think the idea of infrastructure, all of those things are important. But I think we would be doing a poor analysis if we didn't consider the extent to which, one, the candidate drives that energy, and two, it becomes a self-perpetuating machine. I mean, right now, people are talking about politics, I think, more than they were in 2018. They're talking about candidates in a different way than they were in 2018. And I think the things that are coming out of the White House are energizing people more than they were energized in 2018. And infrastructure is important, but I think it's also important to leverage those candidates, and to your earlier point, leverage those resources in places where it makes sense. I don't think you're wrong about the prospects of losing out in West Texas, but I think, to your point, if you narrow those margins with the right candidates and you get behind those candidates in Lubbock, then in the aggregate, those numbers in Lubbock and Jefferson County and these far-flung places coalesce to Texas getting over the finish line. So I don't think it can just be about infrastructure. I think the candidates and the energy behind the candidates is crucially important. And I think this is a much different time and race than 2018 was.